5 African countries that hate France and wants them out. For decades, France has maintained a neo-colonial grip on several African countries, leveraging historical ties to exploit their resources and influence their political landscapes. This exploitation has manifested through economic control, military interventions, and political manipulation, often justified under the guise of stability and development. Former French colonies are witnessing their natural resources extracted with minimal benefit to local populations. However, a wave of awakening is sweeping across the continent. Many African nations are beginning to assert their sovereignty, challenging long-standing relationships that prioritize foreign interests over local empowerment. Citizens are increasingly vocal in demanding an end to French exploitation, advocating for new alliances and a future where their nations can thrive independently. This shift marks a significant turning point in Africa's quest for autonomy and self-determination. In this videos, we shall be counting down 5 African countries that are actively fighting to put an end to French rule and exploitation. Before we proceed, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our videos. 1. Burkina Faso. Historically, Burkina Faso, a former French colony until 1960, has experienced a complex dynamic with France, characterized by both cooperation and resentment. For decades, France has maintained a strong influence in Burkina Faso's political and economic landscape, often viewed as a neo-colonial presence. French military support has been integral in efforts to combat jihadist threats in the Sahel region. However, despite this military assistance, Burkina Faso has faced persistent insecurity, with jihadist attacks escalating since 2015. This failure to ensure stability has contributed to a growing disillusionment among the population regarding France's role in the country. The turning point in Burkina Faso's relationship with France occurred following a military coup in January 2022, led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. The coup was largely fueled by public frustration over the government's inability to address the rising violence from militant groups. The new military leadership began to adopt a nationalist agenda, emphasizing sovereignty and self-determination. Many Burkinabé citizens began to see France not as a partner, but as a detractor to their national interests. Protests against French influence became increasingly common. In November 2022, thousands took to the streets in Ouagadougou, demanding the withdrawal of French troops and expressing outrage over France's perceived failures. Demonstrators waved Russian flags, showcasing a shift towards alternative alliances and a desire to break free from French dependence. This sentiment was echoed in various public gatherings, where chants against French involvement resonated with a populace eager for change. By early 2023, the situation escalated as the Burkinabé government officially announced the termination of military cooperation with France. This decision was a culmination of growing public pressure and an assertion of national sovereignty. The government cited a need for a new approach to security, one that would prioritize local solutions over foreign military interventions. The withdrawal of French troops was framed as a necessary step to restore dignity and autonomy to Burkina Faso. In practical terms, this shift was marked by the expulsion of the French ambassador and the closure of French military bases in the country. The Burkinabé government began to explore partnerships with countries like Russia, seeking military assistance and cooperation. This pivot was not merely rhetorical. The government actively pursued negotiations with the Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary organization, indicating a willingness to embrace new alliances in the face of security challenges. Furthermore, Burkina Faso's leadership has sought to reshape its foreign policy narrative, emphasizing a rejection of neo-colonialism and a commitment to self-reliance. The government has publicized its intent to mobilize local resources and engage with regional partners to combat the threats posed by extremist groups. In summary, the relationship between Burkina Faso and France has undergone a dramatic transformation, moving from cooperation to outright rejection. The military coup, widespread public protests, and the subsequent decision to sever ties with France reflect a profound shift in national sentiment. Burkina Faso's leadership is now actively pursuing a path towards greater sovereignty, signaling a broader regional trend away from French influence in West Africa. 2. Mali. The relationship between Mali and France has undergone significant changes, particularly in recent years, as Mali has increasingly expressed a desire to distance itself from French influence. Historically, France has played a pivotal role in Mali's political and military affairs, stemming from its colonial past. Mali gained independence from France in 1960, but the legacy of colonialism and continued French involvement in regional security has complicated their relationship. Initially, France was seen as a key ally in Mali's fight against jihadist groups in the Sahel region. Following a military coup in 2012, France launched Operation Serval in 2013 to combat Islamist militants who had taken control of northern Mali. This intervention was widely welcomed at first, as it helped stabilize the country and restore government control. However, over time, public sentiment began to shift. Growing dissatisfaction emerged among Malians regarding the effectiveness of French military operations. Many citizens felt that, despite France's presence, security issues persisted, with jihadist attacks continuing in the region. Moreover, there were increasing concerns about France's motives and its role in Mali's internal politics. Many Malians began to view France not as a liberator, but as a neo-colonial force, perpetuating dependency rather than fostering genuine sovereignty. In recent years, this sentiment has intensified, particularly following political upheavals in Mali. After two coups in 2020 and 2021, the transitional government adopted a more nationalist stance, emphasizing the need for Mali to reclaim its sovereignty. Protests erupted against the French military presence, with demonstrators demanding the withdrawal of French troops. Public opinion shifted dramatically, with calls for the government to prioritize local solutions over foreign intervention. The situation escalated further when the Malian government announced the end of military cooperation with France in 2022. This decision was fueled by accusations of France failing to respect Mali's sovereignty and the perception that French forces were not adequately addressing the security crisis. In summary, the relationship between Mali and France has transitioned from alliance to distrust. With rising anti-French sentiment fueled by historical grievances and ongoing security challenges, Mali increasingly seeks to assert its independence and reduce foreign influence, marking a significant turning point in their bilateral relations. 3. Niger. The relationship between Niger and France has been characterized by a complex mix of historical ties, military cooperation, and growing anti-French sentiment in recent years. As a former French colony, Niger has experienced significant French influence in its political, economic, and military affairs since gaining independence in 1960. However, recent developments have led many Nigerians to question this relationship, culminating in widespread calls for the removal of French troops from the country. Historically, France has maintained a strong military presence in Niger, positioning itself as a key ally in the fight against terrorism in the Sahel region. French forces have been involved in various operations aimed at combating jihadist groups, particularly in the context of increasing violence from groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. However, despite the presence of French troops and military assistance, insecurity has persisted, leading to growing frustration among the population. In 2021, a turning point occurred when public sentiment began to shift dramatically against France. This shift was fueled by perceived failures in addressing security concerns and accusations that France was prioritizing its own geopolitical interests over the needs of Nigerian citizens. Protests erupted in several cities, with demonstrators demanding the withdrawal of French troops and expressing a desire for greater national sovereignty. For instance, in October 2021, a significant demonstration in Niamey saw thousands of people chanting anti-French slogans and calling for the government to end military cooperation. The situation escalated further in 2022, as the Nigerian government faced increasing pressure from both the public and political factions to reevaluate its ties with France. The rise of nationalist sentiments coincided with a broader regional trend, where countries like Mali and Burkina Faso have also sought to distance themselves from French influence. Niger's President Mohamed Bazoum faced criticism for maintaining close ties with France, prompting him to navigate a delicate balance between international partnerships and domestic expectations. By 2023, the anti-French sentiment reached new heights, with the government signaling a shift in policy. The Nigerian military began to explore alternative partnerships, particularly with Russia, as part of a broader strategy to diversify security arrangements. This move reflects a desire for autonomy and a rejection of perceived neo-colonialism associated with France's military presence. 4. The Central African Republic. The relationship between the Central African Republic and France has been complex and often fraught with tension. France has maintained significant influence over CAR since it gained independence in 1960. This influence included military support, political intervention, and economic ties, primarily benefiting French interests. Over the years, many Central Africans have grown increasingly resentful of what they perceive as exploitation and neo-colonialism. In recent years, the CAR has faced severe instability, marked by civil wars and violence from various armed groups. France has intervened militarily at different points, citing the need to stabilize the country. However, many citizens view these interventions as self-serving, aimed more at protecting French interests and resources than genuinely aiding the Central African people. The perception that France prioritizes its own strategic and economic interests has fueled a growing anti-French sentiment. Calls for a reduction of French influence have intensified, particularly among young people and civil society groups. Protests have erupted demanding the departure of French troops, with slogans emphasizing national sovereignty and self-determination. The CAR's government has also shown signs of pivoting away from France, seeking partnerships with countries like Russia, which has offered military support and economic cooperation without the historical baggage associated with French colonialism. This shift reflects a broader desire within the CAR to reclaim autonomy and redefine its international relationships. Citizens are increasingly vocal about their dissatisfaction with French dominance and are advocating for a future free from external exploitation, emphasizing the need for genuine partnerships that respect their sovereignty and promote sustainable development. 5. Chad. France's relationship with Chad has been marked by a history of exploitation and political manipulation, leading to growing resentment among the Chadian population. Since gaining independence in 1960, Chad has remained heavily influenced by France, which has often intervened in its internal affairs, claiming to promote stability but primarily serving its strategic interests. One significant aspect of French exploitation in Chad is its control over natural resources, particularly oil. In 2003, the World Bank facilitated the construction of the Chad-Cameroon oil pipeline, which was intended to boost Chad's economy. However, a significant portion of the revenue has been siphoned off by foreign companies and the Chadian government, with little investment in local development. Many citizens feel that this arrangement primarily benefits France and multinational corporations rather than the Chadian people. Moreover, France's military presence in Chad has often been framed as assistance against terrorist threats. However, critics argue that this military cooperation has led to the repression of dissent and the maintenance of authoritarian regimes. For instance, France supported the longtime presidency of Idriss Déby, who ruled with an iron fist, stifling opposition and civil liberties. This support has fostered a sense of betrayal among citizens who yearn for genuine democratic governance. In recent years, there has been a notable shift in public sentiment. Many Chadians are calling for a re-evaluation of their relationship with France, advocating for greater sovereignty and independence from foreign influence. Protests have emerged demanding the withdrawal of French troops and an end to perceived neo-colonial practices. The Chadian government, facing increasing pressure from its population, is exploring new alliances beyond France, signaling a desire for a more equitable and respectful partnership that prioritizes the needs and aspirations of the Chadian people.